Hello everyone, Squirrel Killer here. Before we begin this first Warhammer 40K lore video on the Imperium of Man, I want to point out that no, this video is not exactly so much structured as it, or not structured, rather scripted as it is a list of bullet points which I'm just going to go off on, as well as a massive number of text documents containing research notes for a very long series that turned out to be much bigger than intended, and this is a series intended to act as a buffer before I can actually get to the series I want to do, which will be on the tactics of the 40K universe. So, but before we want to get into the tactics of each faction, I realized there are a lot of factions. And then there's the Imperium of Man, which is like 40 sub-factions, it feels like some days when looking at it from certain lens. Though you can really reduce those factions into far less factions. As a result, we are going to cover the factions in a very broad sense. Some more broad than others. And it is to develop an understanding from where each of these factions' mindset comes from. Of course, starting with the Imperium of Man, which in every previous take of this video, I have at some point referred to as the Empire of Man, the Empire, something else like that, and that's due to the fact that they are an empire, but they're called the Imperium. And I have been playing way too much Total War Warhammer. So if I make that mistake, just in your brain go, he means Imperium. Now then, the best way to understand the Imperium of Man in as few words as possible, if you want to turn this off now before this goes on for another hour, I suggest just listening to the next few words very carefully. The Imperium of Man is a dogmatic, racist, xenophobic, anything but the good guy empire that spans the, I can't say the entirety, but the near entirety of the Milky Way galaxy, made up of uncounted numbers, with worlds with uncountable populations. To compare it to any other fantasy universe, I just can't even see that is feasible. It's just too big. To understand how big the Imperium is, let's work our way up. Imagine a global empire. A single empire that ruled the entirety of Earth. Now expand that to the solar system. And now understand that the Imperium of Man has millions, if not billions, of solar systems, star system spanning empires. So let's expand it a bit bigger. Let's do it to ourselves and any immediate stars. Okay, now bigger. Now bigger. And understand that many of these worlds are something called hive worlds, which are so densely populated that I believe it's Coruscant from the Star Wars franchise, the home of the Republic in the earlier movies, where I believe those are the movies where you got the best view of it. A planet so densely populated that was cities upon cities upon cities. Yes, there are millions of cities like that across the empire, or the Imperium of Man. There's just uncountless numbers of them. There's cities built upon cities built upon cities. There are just, I cannot even begin to explain just how many hive worlds there really are. And they all make the population of anything I've seen from any other fantasy universe look like a small village at best. So to give that gives you an idea just how many people are in the Imperium. As for the actual rulership, well, let's look at a nice little chart I pulled up. I got this off the Wikia because this is one of the best places to get a chart for this visualization. So at the very top you see the Emperor. The Emperor is not very active in his rule of the Imperium, even though the Emperor of Man is, or as the Adeptus Ministratum would like you to, or Ministorum rather, would like you to call him, the God Emperor of mankind, as they worship him as a god. No, I do believe what we need to do here, though, is just take a quick look at the Emperor. This is him in his current state. Kind of skeletal, isn't he? Lots of wires coming out of him. This is because during an event known as the Horus Heresy, his favored son may or may not have all but murdered him horribly. He is sitting on something known as the Golden Throne. The Golden Throne acts as a part psychic beacon for the Immaterium, which I will cover in detail probably around the time I cover Chaos. But for now, just think of it as a parallel dimension that runs alongside our own, built up of the thoughts and feelings, conscious and unconscious, of every sentient being in the galaxy. And it is often used to as a form of faster and light travel. Ships move into the Immaterium, fly a distance in it, and then move out of the Immaterium to a point in the Materium, which is our dimension, traveling light years in a couple of hours. And while it's like, oh, you travel a couple of hours, or sometimes weeks or months or years, you have to understand we're talking sometimes a 5-year voyage in the Immaterium was a 10,000-year voyage out of the Immaterium. You're moving faster than light, but even though you're moving faster than light, we're talking extreme distances. It's not instantaneous travel, but it's so fast that on any scale that you could easily imagine the actual distance of, for example, from here to the next star. So what is the next star over? I used to know this. The closest star to the sun is Alpha Centauri A. There we go. So to move over to Alpha Centauri would be practically instantaneous through the warp. Whereas, and if it wasn't for the fact that the Immaterium, also known as the warp, I will be using those two phrases interchangeably because they are interchangeable, is full of demons and other horrible things, it would be quite good. But yes, other than that, the Golden Throne acts as a life support system, though I can't really say it's doing pretty much to keep the body of the Emperor alive, so much as keep his soul bound to his not rotting. I am of the opinion that the corpse of the God Emperor of Mankind is no longer rotting. It has successfully rotted, as in past tense, as in there's nothing less left to rot away. The rotted corpse of the Emperor of Mankind, and it's more or less just keeping his soul and psyche bound to that body as a tether, giving him something of a physical form, rather than allowing him to just dissolve away into fine gooey warp stuff. And well, the God Emperor of Mankind has a quite impressive history. For example, we know that he was around at Mesopotamian times. He saw the dawn of civilization. In fact, he was around even longer than the dawn of civilization, being thousands of tens of thousands of years old at this point in history. In Warhammer 40K takes place in the year, oh, I it's basically we just stop at 4,000 or 40,999 is kind of the furthest forward I've seen of any Warhammer dates, though I think those are just jokingly. Basically, it takes place within a 1,000-year period of time, and events fall into many places there, as it is 40K, the year 40,000. And he was still seemingly in the year 30,000 in the prime of his youth. From what I've been able to deduce from reading on multiple sources, both the Lexiconum and the Wikia and several novels, I have come to personally deduce that by that point in time, the Emperor of Mankind was, if he is not immortal, which we have great reason to believe that he is literally immortal, in that unless something kills him, he will live forever, about in what is the equivalent of his 30s, which seems like a fairly reasonable age. He's in his prime. He's not quite middle age. He's very much in his prime. And we also know that he has been around for about 40,000 years before that at the very least. He'd be tens of thousands of years old in our current time. And as far as the lore goes, he's currently walking around in this day and age. Meaning somewhere out there, the God Emperor of Mankind is face palming to the election of Donald Trump in the United States of America. Or rather, the possible election of. Thankfully, Trump is not yet in power, and let's hope it stays that way. Now then, the Emperor is, as you can see, a rotting corpse, but he is worshipped as a god. Mostly because he is the most powerful human to ever live. Though, if you want to call him human, that is laughable in my opinion. But you can do as you wish. You see, the God Emperor of Mankind has quite a bit of power, and he, due to his current state, really doesn't take much of an influence upon the world. What we do know is that he acts as a guardian spirit of sorts to the Imperium, and we know that he seems to be able to create things known as living saints, as seen by one here. These are extremely powerful, nearly god-like beings, angels, if you will, given incredible amounts of power by the Emperor himself to help defend the Imperium against little things such as the Daemons of the Warp, the hordes of Xenos, such as orcs. I love me my orcs. Oh, a little bit of Eldar is walking around out there, and a dozen other things, as well as something known as the Legion of the Damned, which very little is actually known about the Legion of the Damned. We don't know really anything about them. We know that they fight in total silence. We know that they have this nasty habit of going, oh, somebody's losing. Well, the Legion of the Damned just happens to show up and murder everything. And we know that they don't seem to be possible to kill. So, who knows what exactly is going on with the Legion of the Damned. We do know that they show up covered in very skull motif covered armor with bones, jet black, and seem to be literally on fire. So that's what we know about the Legion of the Damned. Uh, and that they are also make up. Oh, I would say, 50% of the Emperor's active role, beyond just being a giant psychic beacon, so people can navigate through the warp, using him as kind of a lighthouse. He creates something called the Astronomicon, which basically it's used in the same way that we used to use stars to navigate by sea when traveling through the warp. Now then, underneath the Emperor is two splits. There is the Inquisition and the High Lords of Terror. The Inquisition only answer to the Emperor, which is to say they answer to no one and have unlimited power and can do whatever they want. When you want to know do whatever they want, I mean the Inquisition is both in the lore and kind of joke to a bit of an extreme beyond how much they actually do it. They have a habit of just wiping out planets. It's a fun thing they do, really. Just wipe out an entire planet. No biggie, right? Like, what's the worst that they're going to do? Murder everyone? Well, yeah. Yeah, that's actually what they're doing. And when they do this, they do it through a multitude of ways. A personal favorite of mine is the virus bombing, which basically dissolves almost all organic matter into a bunch of extremely toxic gases, which are then bombed to all hell, igniting these gases, causing a global firestorm that sometimes leaves the planet as just a barren rock on the surface with no surviving life, and other times actually destroys the entirety of the planet. Normally, the tactic is the virus bomb to scour the Earth and then pound away at the planet until you smash it to pieces, leaving a asteroid field in the wake. And I am sure at one point some Inquisitors decided to virus bomb the asteroid field just for good measure. Then on the Inquisition really can do whatever they want. They can go up to anyone in the Imperium and say, "You work for me now," and well, kind of by law, you work for them now. But we will, of course, now move on to the High Lords of Terra. The High Lords of Terra run Terra, which is Earth. And the important thing to know about the High Lords of Terra is they make up the ruling council. That's actually the only thing you need to know about them. They are the ruling council. They run the Imperium. They do the actual work. They do what you would assume the Emperor would do if when you see him at the top. Yeah, anything that's seeing somebody at the top going, "Oh yeah, he runs everything." No, just delegate that down to the High Lords of Terra. They actually run everything. They decide where to go to war, when to go to war, what laws to pass, and yada yada yada. Mostly just affecting Terra directly, and never actually doing anything useful. Then, of course, they are split up into the Adeptus Terra, which splits into a million directions, so we'll come to it last. The Adeptus Mechanicus, which is also known as the Machine Cult, which worships technology and the Omnissiah, which they believe the Emperor to be the avatar or an embodiment of, and the Adeptus Mechanicus rules over Forge Worlds, which are entire planets turned into worshipping temples to the Omnissiah, which is to say they are giant factory complexes producing technology. Which sounds really cool until you realize that we're talking about the Adeptus Mechanicus. And I will get into them in far more detail in a later video, as I'm going to need to cover the Imperium not as a one faction, but rather as several factions. And the Mechanicus is a particular point of just fuck these guys for me. Then we move on to the Adeptus Ministorum. I can never say that right on the first shot. The Adeptus Ministorum. Goddamn high Gothic. They rule over the shrine world as well as religion. They are the church, and they do technically exist to exorcise and combat chaos and demons and the like. But shrine worlds are basically just shrine temples, and the Adeptus Ministorum as a whole, I will cover them in another video. Suffice to say, they enforce the imperial cult as law and murder anyone that worships anything other than the God Emperor of mankind, or anyone who does not worship the God Emperor of mankind. As in, your options are worship the God Emperor of mankind. The Adeptus Mechanicus does this by worshipping him as the Omnissiah. That's the loophole they get away with, though it often puts them at odds with the Ministorum. And, well, if you don't, expect to be purged with holy fire by Sisters of Battle, which are fun. Everybody likes the Sister of Battle. The Adeptus Sororitas, which we will get on to at another point. Then we can go to the Adeptus Terra, which actually, runs things. does things useful, like makes up the government and laws and law enforcement. They're broken up into the Adeptus Astronomica, which handles navigation through the warp. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica, the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, and I can say it correctly, which handles communication between worlds by communicating psychically through the warp. The Adeptus Administratum, which we'll come back to in a moment. The Adeptus Arbites, which act as the semi-military police force, which enforce the law through the empire and kind of act as judges from and our Arbites is like a judge from Judge Dredd. They kind of make and enforce the law at once. And then you have the Adeptus Custodes, which are the super soldiers originally created as the personal fuck you middle finger army of the Emperor during his Great Crusades, and now act as his bodyguards. We don't really need to worry much about the Adeptus Custodes, though I do hope to come back to them to talk a bit about them in another video. That will hopefully be a much shorter video. And then we get to move on now back to the Adeptus Administratum. They handle basically all of the administrative tasks. They work out how much food is being handled. They manage the categorization of new life forms discovered. They handle things such as taxes, the cataloging of new worlds that come under Imperium rule. You know, all the boring stuff. They are basically a whole bunch of administrative purposes. They handle money mostly and numbers, things like that. They are the administrative branch of the Adeptus Terra. And they rule over, as you can see with a dotted line, the Adeptus Astartes, which the reason for that dotted line is the Adeptus Astartes doesn't actually take orders from anyone ever, other than the Emperor of Mankind. They answer directly to the Emperor, but luckily they are very eager to kill anything that is heretical, xenos, or mutant. So if it's not human, they're very happy to kill it, and they wish to serve the Emperor to literally their dying breath. So they listen to the Adeptus Administratum more or less as this is where you will help serve the Imperium and your Emperor the best. This is where you are needed, or this is where there's something that needs to be horrifically murdered. Then, of course, you have the Imperial Guard, which makes up the vast majority of the Imperium's military force. They are known as the Hammer of the Imperium. Some people call them the sledgehammer. I call them the jackhammer. That is because a sledgehammer does a lot of damage. A jackhammer does a lot of damage over and over again. They don't just smash you down and beat you down. They hammer you down under wave after wave of force. And they have almost an answer for everything. And due to the scale of the Imperium of Man, guess what? There are countless regiments which all work differently. They all have their own command structures, more or less. They all have their own combat styles. They all have their own gear that they like to use. Some are, and they almost all have a specialty. And really, you just send whichever regiment seems like the best option for a particular world. There's no two regiments that are too much alike, unless of course they came from the same world. And there are hundreds of guard regiments doing countless missions. Then of course we have the Imperial Fleet, which makes up the navy of the Imperium of Man. Basically, if it is a spaceship with traveling through the void doing anything from civilian to military force, it falls under the Imperial Fleet. Underneath them is the Navis Noboi, which make up the Navigators, which are the Psychers who specifically have a particular mutation, a gene known as the Navigator gene. This lets them see the tides and ripples of the warp to navigate and guide a ship safely through the warp, as the immaterial more closely resembles the ocean in a hurricane more so than a calm sea. And occasionally there are miniature hurricanes in these hurricanes. So that will give you a good idea of just how difficult this navigation can be. And they are very closely related to the Adeptus Astronomica. Now, if we turn to over to the Imperial Commander, these are the planetary governors. And, well, basically, that just means anybody who's in charge of a planet. And how exactly planets are ruled is, well, some planets really enjoy having a democracy. Others seem to work quite fine under a tyrannical dictatorship. Others are ran by whoever happens to have the most money at the time, and others are in perpetual war with no one really ruling it. And at the end of the day, the Imperium of Man doesn't care so long as those worlds pay their taxes and say, here's the soldiers we're required to give you. Then you have the official Assassinorum, and the official Assassinorum doesn't exist, so we're just going to skip over it. Everybody knows that they don't exist. There is no office of assassins working for the Adeptus Administratum. What are you saying? It's not like everybody knows they exist. It's one of those open secrets. They do not exist, though everybody knows they exist. And they are the assassins of the Imperium. The solution to any time when the Imperial Guard or the Adeptus Astartes would just be way too much, and you want a more surgical, what's the word I'm looking for? Application of lethal force. For example, sometimes you need to murder everyone, so you need a lot of force put on many people. Other times, and that's when you would use the Imperial Guard. Other times, there's a smaller group of people, but still a group that needs a fair amount of force, so you use the Adeptus Astartes. And other times you need a lot of force put on the forehead of someone. That's when the official Assassinorum decides to put a lot of force on their forehead, splattering their brains against the walls. Finally, there are the rogue traders, which act kind of as explorers, privateers and quote unquote traders of the Imperium. My understanding of the rogue traders has always been fuzzy at best. I think it's mostly because, one, they are not something that has ever shown up much in my research of other things, and two, they're related to the Imperium, which I don't pay much attention to the Imperium when I'm looking up things just for fun, and three, they don't show up much in anything at all, anyways. Though they do exist, and they act kind of as rich merchants who kind of do as they please, and mercenaries, and operate within the bounds of the law. They work just outside of the bounds of the law, often trading with Xenos, even though that's strictly forbidden, often exploring and recovering artifacts, facilitating trade, and several other tasks. It's very confusing what their exact role is, but they're integral, and without them, exploration and such would kind of grind to a halt. They are definitely interesting, but you won't see them much because, well, they're related to the Imperium, and they don't really show up as a military role, and 40K primarily likes to focus on its military. Now, that gives us a very broad view of the Imperium of Man. But of course, this part of this video is to explain how their minds work. Well, as I said, the worship of the God Emperor of mankind is law. Every Imperial Guardsman is extremely religious and fights for his god, the Emperor. They also hate everything that's not human for a long list of reasons. Mostly it's the Emperor of mankind didn't like anything that was not human. And that's about the only reason you need to know on how they can justify it to themselves. So, of course, they will eagerly fight anything that is not human. They do not value individual human lives as, well, there's more of them. The Imperium is just too big. So, for example, during the High Fleet Leviathan crisis, I believe it was, or was it Behemoth? During one of the Tyrannic Wars against a race known as the Tyranids, whose psychological overview video, as this is part of for understanding them, will be unfortunately incredibly short because those guys are very easy to understand. The Tyranids will swoop down and they will drain a planet of all nutrients, all biomatter, all the metals, anything that can be used to increase the biomass of the Hive fleet, and they suck planets dry, sucking away its atmosphere, its water, draining out consuming the molten core, and collecting a lot of the metals found in the surface, leaving it nothing but a barren, dustless rock, completely devoid of life or being usable for life. It doesn't have any value to anyone once the Tyranids hit, as it will simply consume anything of value. So, once the Tyranids, to help stop them, because every time they hit a planet, they get stronger, which is one of the problems with fighting the Tyranids. Even if you kill hundreds of them, they will just simply consume their own dead, adding their biomass back to the hive fleet, as well as any biomass that that planet added to their hive fleet. If you can't defeat them in a battle, if they do eventually win, then they will only have a net gain. They do not care about individuals. So to prevent their growth, because they weren't able to fight the Tyranids, they blew up some planets. Because the death of billions was preferable over allowing some Tyranids to get their hands on it. That shows just how little the Imperium actually cares about human life. After all, they like to use the Imperial Guard as a sledgehammer, as I said, which really means they will go, how many guys does it take to overrun the enemy until they will run out of bullets and we can conquer the planet? Oh, that many? Send that many. And then a few more for a garrison force after. So yes, the actual value of life for the Imperium is non-existent, which means they really only care about the Imperium as a whole. Little parts of it are not important. In fact, what they care about more than the guardsmen are the weapons they wield. A laser rifle, the primary armament of a guardsman, is worth more than the guardsman's life itself. So let that sink in. Let it sink in that they are religious to the extreme and will kill anyone who does not agree with their religious beliefs. And let it sink in that they will kill anything that is not human. And that will give you an understanding of the Imperium of Man. From here, I will need to split up the Imperium into its sub-factions. Specifically, the sub-factions I actually care to go into any amount of detail on, and maybe some others. We will likely start with the Adeptus Astartes, as that is the least overwhelming portion. Actually, no, let me correct that. We will start with the Adeptus Ministorum, because I want to be able to cover the religion so that I can then cover the other religion, which is the Adeptus Mechanicus, and that will give the foundation needed to move on into probably breaking down the Adeptus Terra and picking up some factions there. So thank you all for watching, and bye-byes.